Okay. All right. So welcome to another educational and inspiring AAM workshop. This workshop is entitled The Power of Language Choice in Activism. As activists, our language choices can be our greatest asset or our most self-defeating liability. Perhaps in our efforts to make veganism approachable, we compromise our convictions and soften our ethics. Perhaps to wake people up, we become aggressive and polarizing. We wonder how they're not getting it when to us it's so painfully clear. In this workshop, Emily of bitesizevegan.org addresses the power and importance of language in activism and discusses how to walk the line of staying firm in your convictions and uncompromising in your message while still helping people lower their guard enough to listen, hear, and make the connection. So my name is Michelle Granberg, and I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for over 5 years. AAM's mission is to eradicate violence and build a culture of empathy and compassion, which ultimately results in animal liberation. We strive to build a global community of activists through our free online program that pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we strive to generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide because we all know that this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of animal rights activism. We also have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host live, large-scale activism events. AAM is also proud to be fueled by FARM, the Farm Animal Rights Movement, one of the oldest AR organizations in the country. If you're interested in applying to become a mentor or mentee or want to get involved or to donate, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM on social media. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. My pleasure to introduce to you Emily Moran Barwick. Emily is an animal liberation activist, educator, writer, artist, and international speaker. Emily founded Bite Size Vegan upon the belief that everyone deserves access to solid, factual information on issues impacting their health, our planet, society, and the lives of other sentient beings. I'll let her tell you more about herself. And again, we'll open up for Q&A after the presentation. So hold on to your questions and you can just raise your hand when we're there. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Go ahead, Emily, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I wanted to start out today by saying that while I have come a long way in my activism over the years, I have yet to ever feel that I've, got this down. To be honest, the more I progress in my activism, the less sure-footed I feel. And it may sound kind of weird because I'm here to talk about how to increase the effectiveness of your activism, but in many ways, I feel like my perpetual uncertainty is actually one of my greatest strengths. As counterintuitive as it can seem, I hope that today I actually leave you a little more uncertain of yourself. Because uncertainty spurs consideration and forethought. So thinking before we act and watching what we say. Because as activists, our language choices can be our greatest assets or our most self-defeating liabilities. When we're not mindful of our approach, we risk not only failing to communicate our message, but even more problematic, communicating a whole other message entirely. So if you're new to activism, increasing your level of uncertainty may sound like the last thing that you want to do. And you may feel that you're up to your eyeballs already in uncertainty. If you're anything like me, you really want to know like the exact right thing to say to reach non-vegans. And you want it to be clear and simple and universally applicable, that just this set template for effective activism that's going to work for every single person. And I'm going to let you know up front, I don't have that. to offer. I spent decades trying to figure out how to talk about veganism, awkwardly fumbling about and never really finding the holy grail of effective activism. What I have found through a lot of trial and mostly error is the value of not actually having a set approach, of kind of remaining perpetually uncertain. And in this respect, those of you who are brand new to activism actually have an advantage over experienced activists, because you're not yet set in your ways. You're not yet comfortable with what to say. And if you are an experienced activist, by now it's maybe not so much figuring out what to say, but more so figuring out how to keep finding the energy to keep saying it. You know, perhaps you've reached a point of exasperation and exhaustion from pouring everything you have into reaching people, only to feel like you're hitting a wall. And regardless of where you are in your activism, I do hope today to help you more effectively communicate your message. Now, before considering an approach, we have to understand as best we can the nature of what we're dealing with. And there's nothing quite like our species' seemingly hardwired resistance to anything having to do with veganism. It honestly defies logic and common sense, and it's present in every country, class, race, culture, even century. So when we proceed under the assumption that it's just a matter of people getting the facts, we set ourselves up for a great deal of running in place. And when we ascribe people's resistance to, or their outright denial, to a lack of intelligence or simple stubbornness, we're all too easily dismissing them entirely. We only have to observe like how many well-educated, intelligent individuals make it into adulthood believing that cows spontaneously produce milk, which defies all mammalian physiology, to know that this is not a matter of intelligence. Understanding that allows us to kind of shift our perspective. What we may have seen as the reasons our message was rejected now become guideposts to better inform our approach. So rather than focusing so intensely on what to say, we can turn our attention to how we are saying it, because it is the how that makes all the difference. In navigating language within animal rights activism, education, and advocacy, there are countless pitfalls and distractions, diversions, and traps that we can fall into. The most dangerous of these are often wrapped in the guise of making veganism more approachable. And in our efforts to increase the accessibility of veganism, we may inadvertently compromise our convictions and soften our ethics, offering gradations of change to people, or incremental reductions in animal product consumption, or humane alternatives. And this is often born from this belief that we have to either take a firm, even militant and polarizing, or a very soft, conciliatory approach to our outreach. But that's really a false dichotomy. The real challenge is walking that line of staying firm in our convictions and uncompromising in our message, while still helping people to lower their guard enough to listen, to hear, and to make that connection. And within the vegan movement, a major approach that activists will take is the social normalization of veganism. And so what I mean by this is making a vegan lifestyle accessible, affordable, easy, even mainstream. It's a very logical tactic, especially when considering that one of the strongest deterrents to going vegan is social ostracism and rejection from friends and family. I am the last person to decry increasing the accessibility of veganism. It's something about which I am very passionate, and it's one of the foundational aspects of Bite Size Vegan. However, in attempting to bridge this gap and meet the general public where they're at, there does exist a risk of reducing the ethical imperative of veganism to a socially acceptable lifestyle choice. And this is why it's so vital that we be mindful of our language as activists, lest we end up advocating the very things that we're fighting against. And a common approach that activists can take to provide a bit of an entry point to veganism is encouraging people to reduce their intake of animal products. So things like Meatless Mondays. And such an incremental approach is it's obviously more palatable to non-vegans because it allows them to make a very minor change while still providing the emotional benefit of doing something good. But it also is alluring for us as activists because, perhaps we're afraid of coming across as extreme and we want to provide a less intimidating suggestion. Perhaps we ourselves are intimidated to ask for something so big as going fully vegan. And perhaps we believe that, any change is better than no change at all. And it's understandable for such fears to arise. But we really have to take a step back and recognize their implications. Because believing that going fully vegan is too much to ask just reinforces that misconception. And offering gradations of change, in essence, endorses the idea that there are acceptable levels of cruelty. So when I spoke in Dublin, Ireland, I met Sandra Higgins, who's the founder of Eden Farmed Animal Sanctuary in Ireland. She's also a psychologist. And I remember her making this very apt analogy. She said something along the lines that if she had a patient who was beating his wife and his children, she would never advise him to try to reduce the frequency of his violence or stop beating his wife on Fridays. The message has to be that violence is always unacceptable and has to be eradicated. So when we take this approach of reductionism, we're not only doing a disservice to the animals, but also to the non-vegans, because we are deciding for them that they can't handle the full truth. We are deciding for them that they cannot or will not make the decision to go vegan. And this is actually very similar to the way in which the American Heart Association approached its official dietary recommendations, which they called the DASH diet, that stood for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. So while decades of research have demonstrated that consuming animal products is highly significantly associated with elevated blood pressure, the DASH diet still includes dairy and meat. And in his book, How Not to Die, Dr. Michael Greger explains why this is the case. So this is a quote. The reason that the DASH diet was modeled explicitly after vegetarian diets, but was not meat-free itself, might surprise you. The primary design goal of the DASH diet was to explicitly create eating patterns that would have the blood pressure lowering benefits of a vegetarian diet, yet contain enough animal products to make them palatable to non-vegetarians. The doctor who chaired the DASH diet committee had even shown that the more dairy vegetarians consumed, the higher their blood pressure appeared to rise. But he figured there was no point in calling for a diet he believed few would follow. This is a recurring theme in official dietary recommendations. Instead of simply telling you what the science shows and then letting you make up your own mind, experts patronize the population by advocating what they think is practical rather than ideal. By making the decision for you, they undermine those willing to make even greater changes for optimal health. So in the same way, when we preemptively offer non-vegans gradations of change, rather than the entirety of the truth, we deprive them of the opportunity, and I believe the right, to have all of the facts and to make a decision for themselves. And the same holds true for what I believe to be the most insidious pitfall for activists and non-vegans alike, which are humane labels and animal welfare legislation. Humane language and concepts have easily gained a stronghold because they do appeal to all sides. For the vegan who is afraid of coming across as militant, they provide a more approachable suggestion. For activists fighting for animal liberation, they give the possibility for better conditions, progress towards the ultimate goal of liberation. And certainly for the non-vegans who now have a way to keep doing exactly what they want to, but feel good about it. And it can sound a bit odd coming from an animal rights activist, but I do find that humane labels and animal welfare regulations are often detrimental to animals. In fact, the the entire concept of animal welfare is antithetical to animal rights, because welfare regulations are designed to spare animals any unnecessary suffering. So the unspoken implication being that some suffering is necessary when it benefits humans. Still, even if animal liberation is our ultimate goal, isn't there value in improving the conditions for those currently in our systems of exploitation? While this thought is very understandable, we have to again take an honest look at what welfare regulations actually mean for the beings that they are designed to protect. And a real striking example of the true impotence of welfare regulations is the battery cage ban within the EU. And I've spoken about this a number of times, but I feel like it really provides a great concrete example. So in 1999, the Council of the European Union set a directive that banned all barren battery cages by 2012. In the media coverage at the time, they focused on this end of battery cages in the EU. But what the directive actually did was replace barren battery cages with enriched battery cages, which just meant furnished. So hens would now be provided more space and given furnishings like perches and laying nests, and which is certainly an improvement over barren cages. But while these media reports extol that the hens would now be afforded 750 square centimeters rather than 550 square centimeters, they neglected to clarify that due to the new furnishings, only 600 square centimeters would be usable. And I know that's a lot of numbers, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but what it meant in the end was that this big revolutionary step forward for the rights of laying hens granted each of them less than a single playing card of additional space. And even more maddening in all of this, in 2012, over 12 years after this directive, 13 member states had still failed to comply with this ban. But meanwhile, the media celebrated this victory for animals, and the public ate even more eggs, reassured by these higher standards. And thus, the individuals the entire charade was supposed to be for remained just as, if not more, exploited. And the execution of the barren battery cage ban is really far from a single failing. In 2001, the EU outlawed gestation crates. And if you're not familiar with gestation crates, they are single sow enclosures that have metal bars and a hard concrete floor, and mother pigs are confined in them during their pregnancies. And as always, this ban came with ample fine print exceptions and over a decade for implementation. And once again, 12 years later, 9 member states had still failed to comply with the ban. The most absurd thing about this is that several of the member states that failed to implement the battery cage and or gestation crate bans are rated amongst the best countries in the world for animal welfare. So as alluring as the idea of better conditions for animals may be, animal welfare legislation is based upon the presumption that we have the right to use non-human animals for our own purposes, rather than condemn the breeding, enslavement, mutilation, and slaughter of sentient beings. Welfare legislation simply codifies precisely how we may breed, enslave, mutilate, and slaughter them. In 2007, the European Union historically declared non-human animals legally sentient, saying they were deserving freedom from hunger, thirst, discomfort, pain, injury, disease, fear, distress, and mental suffering. Now, having recognized their capacity to feel the same emotions and sensations as we do, the EU proceeded to draft landmark legislation for their humane treatment. And the resulting council regulation was and is viewed as a victory for animals. And for those of us in countries without regulations, it is natural to think that the systemic abuse of farmed animals results, at least in large part, from a total lack of oversight. In the United States, for example, there are no federal laws governing the treatment of animals in our food industry. We do have the Animal Welfare Act from 1966, but like so many welfare acts around the world, it excludes animals raised for food, as do the majority of state anti-cruelty regulations. So many US activists and organizations stress the need for regulations to end such atrocities as routine mutilations without anesthetic, the maceration, meaning the grinding up of male chicks in the egg industry, and the blunt force euthanasia of pigs. And they often point to the European Union as this shining example of welfare regulations. However, within the EU legislation and documents, these very same atrocities are not decried, they're codified. So instead of male baby chicks being ground up alive because there are no regulations to stop it, they are ground up alive because regulations declare it as the preferred method for male chick disposal. There are even detailed specifications for blade speed and sharpness to avoid gumming up the works with the chicks. We'd like to think that humane regulations are driven by what's best for the animals. But the animal products industries are, after all, industries. They're profit driven. A preliminary report for the EU legislation found that while gassing the estimated 335 million day-old male chicks killed in the EU annually would cost about 1.7 million euros, the cost of using, quote, rotating or whirling knives, which are mincing the chicks in a split second, can be considered not to be substantial. So the decision had nothing to do with what was most humane. It was simply a matter of what was cheapest. And, you know, the maceration of baby chicks has been exposed time and again in undercover footage, which brings me to another pitfall that I wanted to address, which is the presentation of undercover exposés. While I do believe that undercover footage is of vital importance in the fight for animal liberation, we must be mindful of the framing and the presentation. When it comes to these undercover exposés, it's often what's not said that's the most damaging. Every time undercover footage has captured workers from one country or another tossing live baby chicks into a grinder, news outlets dramatically recount this unbelievable cruelty. And every time the public is appalled and outraged and disgusted, and every time they assume it's an isolated incident of extreme cruelty, and they continue to eat eggs, confident that they are not supporting that kind of brutality. The most important message of all is left unsaid, that this is not a barbaric practice isolated to corrupt, abusive facilities or industrialized farms, that grinding up live babies is a welfare regulation, a worldwide standard practice. The fact that the lines between overt abuse and standard industry practice are so indistinguishable highlights the absurdity of animal welfarism and humane concepts. In my essay, The Harm of Humane, from the book Vegan Voices, I opened with a specific example of this from my home state of Iowa. So in 2008, an undercover video documented routine abuse at an Iowa pig breeding facility and made international news. The footage and the investigators' notes captured workers kicking and beating pregnant pigs with metal objects and sexually violating them with rods. They were also shown cutting off the tails and tearing out the testicles of piglets without anesthetic, and slamming sick or deformed piglets against the ground, leaving them to die slowly piled on top of one another in giant bins. So while these acts of cruelty were exposed by vegan activists, the egregiousness of the abuse rightfully sparked outrage from meat-eating consumers. The company that supplied the farm, Hormel, which is a massive company, received over 10,000 calls in 2 days. In the Wire report that was issued by the Associated Press, a Hormel spokesperson was quoted calling the abuses completely unacceptable. And the farm's owner emphasized, we we condemn these types of acts and called them completely intolerable, reprehensible, and vowed to investigate and initiate corrective action immediately. Excuse me. So anyone reading that report in the media would be left with this impression that this was an isolated incident of overt cruelty, or at the very worst, a regular occurrence isolated to large factory farms. But amidst the cataloged horrors, there was the troubling implication of a single sentence that was very easily overlooked. Following the description of the workers' treatment of the piglets, the report stated, quote, Temple Grandin, a leading animal welfare expert who serves as a consultant to the livestock industry, said that while those are standard industry practices, the treatment of the sows on the video was far from it. This is atrocious animal abuse, Grandin said. So to be clear, the treatment of the mother pigs is what Grandin deemed atrocious animal abuse. The acts that she waved away as standard industry practices were the unanesthetized mutilation of newborn piglets and the brutal and ineffective slamming of defective piglets against the concrete floor. And she was not wrong, because not only are those practices legal, they are government sanctioned methods within but not limited to the United States, Canada, and the European Union. So within my essay, I implore the reader to ask themselves, were you to have watched that video, heard the piercing screams of the mother pigs and their babies, would you have spotted the difference between the atrocious animal abuse and the standard industry practice? When we fail to explain and emphasize that the horrors depicted in these videos are not only legal, but actually government-sanctioned humane legislation dictated practices, we leave the public with the impression that this was the result of a few malicious sociopathic workers or poorly regulated facilities, just a few bad apples. Far from considering veganism, the public is left thinking, well, luckily, the perpetrators were exposed and are going to be punished. And thank goodness that the eggs, meat, and dairy that we eat isn't contributing to this kind of abusive behavior. Invariably, when these horrific acts are exposed to the public, there is a call for stronger regulations, for higher welfare standards. And as activists, we can become caught up in this self-perpetuating cycle, believing that we're fighting for progress when we're simply running in place. An example of this cycle is the rise of cage-free eggs. So I had published an article, video, and e-course on cage-free eggs. You can find that at bitesizevegan.org/cagefree. And as always happens when I dive into researching a topic, even one that I've looked into before, I always find so much new information. So laying hens were originally actually moved into battery cages for a number of reasons, including profit and management benefits, but also for perceived benefits to the hens themselves. It was going to help with a reduction in disease transference, injurious pecking, and cannibalism. But as demand for cage-free systems rose, multiple studies actually found that the mortality rate in non-cage systems was higher than battery cage systems due to those very issues. So a rise in disease transference, injurious pecking, and cannibalism. And in one of the more comprehensive studies that I'd quoted in the past, they found that cage-free hens had 2.5 times higher mortality rate than battery cage hens. But this was not just isolated to one study or one country. So initially, it would seem that cage-free eggs actually result in more deaths than conventional cages. But in more recent years, researchers have pointed out that the reason for higher mortality may not have anything to do with the housing system. Instead, the rates appeared more reliably tied to the genetic strain of hens within the facilities, the experience level of managing staff, and whether the flocks are debeaked. And researchers argue that as producers have become more familiar with managing non-cage systems and have started to use more appropriate breeds, the mortality rates have been on the decline, and they believe they're going to continue. Now, at first glance, I thought, and I was a bit worried, that perhaps the decline in mortality rates in non-cage systems was actually a promising trend in support of humane labels like cage-free eggs. But the more that I read, the more that I found that rather than pointing to reasons for hope, the causes of mortality decline actually highlighted the reality that within the animal products industry, the solutions are the problems. Because every time our breeding, confinement, mutilation, and slaughter of non-human animals invariably cause ethical, environmental, health problems, we strive to solve them with different variations of breeding, confinement, mutilation, and slaughter. And we continue this cycle over and over again, addressing problems of our own creation with solutions that will eventually become our next problem, rather than taking a step back and questioning our use of animals in the first place. Because when hens injure and kill one another due to their breeding and living conditions, both of which we have imposed upon them, the solution is to cut off their beaks and alter their breeding. Because this has happened before in reverse. In Denmark, laying hens were not moved into cages until the 1980s. And at that time, the dominant breed of hens was adapted specifically for non-cage systems. When we moved them into cages, their mortality rates increased 5 times over, which is the same trend observed when moving hens bred for battery cages into cage-free systems. So the problem isn't really the housing or the label or the stocking density or whatever we want to point to. The problem is us and how we relate to these beings. When we have, as activists, push for welfare reform, higher standards, better regulations, we are participating in this cycle. We are participating in a cycle, in a system built upon a faulty and unethical premise that animals are ours to use, and that there is a right and acceptable way to use them, and that the solution to their suffering is just to further control and manipulate their very beings. So after covering a lot of examples of what not to say in our activism and the dangers of humane rhetoric, I did want to talk about some approaches of what to say and how to say it, as well as to remove some common barriers that can arise when speaking with non-vegans. So as activists, we need to stay focused on the universal truth underlying any use of sentient beings. You know, even if we imagine an idealized small farm where animals are given ample space outdoors, their every need is cared for, there is still going to come a time when their life is cut short. Their entire existence is still based upon an owner-product framework. Their value is not viewed as inherent, but rather calculated down to the dollar. And one way of effectively cutting to this core truth for non-vegans is to place it within a familiar emotional framework for them. We may have them envision this idealized small farm, but imagine, in place of the happy farmed animals, a beloved family pet. In this situation, would it be acceptable to end their pet's life? You know, what if we guaranteed that they wouldn't feel a thing, that it would be quick and humane? Instantly, the unacceptability of this situation is clear to them at a visceral level. And from that connection, we can explore with them what is the difference between your pet and a sentient being in the food industry. Do they not also feel pain and fear? We can even give them a specific example. When a mother cow in the dairy industry cries out for her calf, taken from her so she will produce more milk for humans, is that not a mother grieving? When she is sexually violated yet again to induce yet another pregnancy and give birth to yet another child who will yet again be taken from her, how can that not take an emotional and physical toll? You know, there is a reason why dairy cows' bodies generally give out around age 4 to 5, despite having a natural lifespan of 20 years or more. And, you know, applying that kind of emotionality to non-human animals is often criticized as anthropomorphic, an objection that illustrates the contradiction of humane concepts. Because humane regulations are an inherent admission of an animal's ability to suffer and feel pain. So how can we claim that our animals are healthy and happy, but then deny that they possess these capacities when we're asked to see from their perspective? We can't have it both ways. And this is how profoundly illogical our thinking is when it comes to animals. Because knowing better, but doing wrong anyways, is worse than having no knowledge. Yet we do have the audacity to hold the legislative recognition of non-human sentience on high as a giant step forward for the rights of animals, as if systematically exploiting individuals with fully admitted knowledge and comprehension of their capacity to suffer is something to commend. And highlighting this faulty logic and focusing on the fundamental truth that we've all known since childhood, that it's not okay to hurt others, cuts through all the convoluted justifications and diversions, allowing people to reconnect with their own values. And as I stated in the opening of this speech, activists often fall into the trap of offering gradations of change or humane alternatives when seeking a more approachable entry point for non-vegans. And I've long believed that one of the main reasons that people don't go vegan is the immense pain and guilt of accepting our part in horrific atrocities. Confronting the true impact of our choices is incredibly daunting. So instead, we shut down, we attack, we throw any number of standard objections out there that you've no doubt heard countless times. Where do I get my protein? Lions, desert islands. And it's human nature to raise our guards when we're on the defensive. We close off and we shut down. And it would seem logical as activists to avoid upsetting our audience in order to keep their receptivity open. However, this is a perfect illustrative example of walking that line, because it's not about making sure not to upset anyone. If they're grasping the truth, they should be upset. It's making sure, though, that the pushback to the truths we reveal are aimed at their rightful sources, leading to constructive and well-deserved outrage. So when we present them with solid factual information about the industries in an educational setting, we can supply a buffer of sorts, providing a target for their outrage other than themselves, and thus sidestepping that shutdown and channeling their outrage into action. And I do want to note that this is not an attempt to excuse participation in exploitation. When I speak to a non-vegan audience, I always tell them that they deserve to know the truth about what they're putting in their body, about what they're feeding to their children. They deserve to know how what they eat impacts their planet, and that they certainly deserve to know what they are paying others to do to animals in their name. And approaching vegan outreach from this perspective can help diffuse the charge of defensiveness and resistance. There's no need to pander or sugarcoat or offer more palatable outlets. I simply present them with factual evidence, allowing them to evaluate whether they want to continue supporting actions out of lines with their own values. Now, another barrier I strive to eliminate in my activism is the issue of trust. There are many reasons non-vegans can dismiss the vegan message, and not the least of which is the messenger. And this is why when I speak to non-vegans, I'm sure to present information put forth by their own agricultural industries and governmental bodies. This not only helps diffuse the potential defensive charge of some random vegan telling them how bad things are, but it also lets me show that even the proposed ideal, which of course is never met, is absolutely horrifying. This is a particularly important approach when speaking to audiences in other countries or cross-culturally. When I spoke in Dublin, I dove deep into the humane legislation of both Ireland and the European Union. And Ireland is really a powerful case study. It's essentially the humane concept embodied in country form. Cows are grazing outside in picturesque fields, which lends support to the common refrain that, well, it's not like that here. And by all appearances and accounts, it's not. You know, even after some digging, I only found a single undercover video of abuse. But I didn't want to focus on abuse. I wanted to focus on the ideal standards. And I told the audience there, the facts I present today are not of my own creation. I've sourced them primarily from Irish governmental and industry documents and the European Union. And I stated that they didn't even have to believe me, because I'd be providing a link to a full transcript of the talk with citations and a bibliography. And this not only provides opportunity for further learning, but it also removes the significant potential barrier of requiring someone to trust in me personally on issues about which they're already guarded. So as animal activists, we don't have to fear presenting the bare facts. We don't have to try to sensationalize or exaggerate, because the truth is bad enough. The ideal, the very best that we have to offer, is bad enough. And more importantly, we don't need to and should not compromise the integrity of our ethics in an effort to make veganism more approachable. When we do so, we are supporting the very thing that we are fighting against. We don't have to fear sharing the truth with others. It's not only vital for the sentient beings we are defending, but it's also the most respectful approach for the non-vegan with whom we're speaking, because they deserve to know, and they deserve to make a choice with all of the facts at their disposal. I hope that this has been a helpful exploration of the importance of language in activism and how to avoid compromising the integrity of your message through respecting everybody's right to the truth. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. That was so awesome, Emily. I'm still digesting so much great information, so well presented. So then we're going to open up for questions now. So if you have a question, go ahead and hit the hand raise icon, and I will call upon you. So who has a question for Emily now? Jeremy, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. Really enjoyed the talk, Emily. Yeah, I guess I'm curious if we could dive a little bit more into like specific language options, because I guess a lot of the talk was about kind of scope and kind of goal setting. And I'm just curious, you know, if there's any language that you specifically try to avoid, or any language you specifically try to use, you know, for instance, not referring to our fellow animals as it, implying their object and property status. And also just if there's any tricks you use, and I'll throw one line out that I use is the flip it to test it. You know, would we use the same language if we're talking about humans? You know, for instance, a big one for me is farms. Like if we did what we did to humans and put them in these buildings, we wouldn't refer to them as farms. So just curious if you have any other similar tricks.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you pointed out, you know, definitely not saying it is always a good thing. And I was trying to think, like, the place my brain went is not terribly helpful or appropriate, but I'll share it anyway. I actually had made a video about this, but like, you know, these more subtle things that we use, and I don't think this is like first line of something to focus on, but you know how we say like there's more than one way to skin a cat, or don't beat a dead horse, or a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I did a video years ago where I just kind of did a jokey thing about like, if you replace those with human things, it kind of like shows how even this like casual terminology is so violent. Because I think one that I did for like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, I think I said like hold on, oh yeah, a kid in the van is worth two on the playground, which like, let's, you know, it shows like that's really inappropriate, you know, because now you're talking about humans. But yeah, and I also, even like I said in the speech, like even if you don't want to, because sometimes if you like try to compare human and animals, people get prickly about it, you know, like because there's this perceived like superiority. And that's where like doing the what about your dog, you know, can kind of get to people a little bit more, because they're more willing to make that comparison than they are. But even like small things, like saying farmed animals instead of farm animals, because farmed is like, it's what's being done to them. Like they're not inherently a farm animal, but some of those it's like can get just very nuancy. So I do also like I will say things like pet, or instead of companion animal. Because sometimes I find that like there's also an importance of being relatable with language, like to a degree, not to the point of endorsing anything, but like when you're just trying to connect with someone, sometimes if you go in like full vegan terminology, like level 10 vegan, they won't know what you're talking about. But I'm sorry, I feel like I've strayed quite a bit from your actual question. Yeah, I don't know. And also it's like, I think with one thing I also did want to just note is like, if you are talking to someone and they are saying, oh, well, I've gone, or I'm cutting out meat on Fridays and everything. And I'm sorry, I'm just kind of sidetracking. I do want to be clear that like, when I'm emphasizing is like not preemptively offering that. But if someone tells me, hey, I've cut down on what, I'm never going to like hit them upside the head and be like, not enough, like it's great for you. Here's like some more stuff about what you can do. But yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I feel like I didn't answer your question very well at all.
No, you answered it great, and I don't want to take too much of the platform up. One thing I like to do in that situation is ask what inspired them to do that, because chances are the same reason they started is why, and then build the case. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Great question, Jeremy. Thank you for that. So now Juan has his hand up. You can go next. Unmute yourself, Juan.
Hi, first of all, I'm a huge fan. Thank you for all you do. And I appreciate this workshop, learned a lot. I do have a question. Some of the bigger organizations in the animal rights movement that they have a big platform, a lot of followers. They do a lot of good, but they don't, a lot of them don't, the message is not clear and it's not exactly what you're talking about. How do we get these organizations to shift their message so that it is, unapologetic, bold, and about animal rights and not welfareism? As an example, Mercy for Animals, like, I do like them. They do a lot of good, but they're also very apologetic and very welfarist. And they have so much power and potential, and their message is not what it needs to be, in my opinion. And I find that happens in a lot of the big organizations. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it can be frustrating. I've found even, I've gone on, or, I've seen like organizations that are focused on animal law, and it can be discouraging where, kind of like what I was saying, like even on these, there'll be like a thing on their site where it's like a list of all of the things that are legal in America because we don't have regulations. And it's like, and then they're like, in the EU there's all these regulations. It's like, well, yeah, but those things are still legal. They're just legal because they're in the law. So it is really frustrating. And I wish I had a solution as far as like, here's how to make sure we're being clear. The best that I can offer is what I myself try to do, which is to put out the information that I can put out, like, and I know it can feel like a drop in the bucket, because obviously I don't have the power and the reach of a big organization or anything. But I do find that like putting out that information best that I can and educating people about it can, at least it can get it out there more. And I also feel like sometimes being proactive in spreading information versus spending maybe time and energy on trying to correct the message of others, when sometimes it's like, how effective or productive would that be, given like we all have such limited time and energy, and so getting our voices out there with like, here's this information. And I don't know, it can be discouraging, for sure. And I also don't think it has to be like well, now this organization or whatever has no value because of X, Y, or Z. But I do also become discouraged when it's like this great like lead up to like, like whether it's an expose or whatever, and then it's like at the very end it's like, oh, so close, and then it's like, you'll see some. I think there was like the book Jonathan Safran for Eating Animals or whatever it's called. He does this whole thing is like leading up to like go vegan, and then in the end I think it's something like, well, maybe just like local meat is okay, and it's like, you're right there. So yeah, it can be really really frustrating, but I think just like getting out as much of the actual the education that you can, and and I mean, you can try reaching out. I think it's always just if you like, want to actually reach out to any of the organizations. And I think it's always just coming at it though from a respectful thing of like, hey, I just wanted to bring this to your attention, or have you seen X, Y, or Z information? And coming at it from a proactive and a productive kind of collaborative approach, I think, could have some value. I don't know if it'll make any impact, but I think that kind of outreach can maybe, coming at it from that tone versus like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like you shouldn't be saying X, Y, or Z, because I think as a community, any community, infighting can become very destructive. But that also doesn't mean that we don't share and adapt and learn from one another. So I'm sorry, that's not like a fixed answer though.
No, I think that's great. The only thing that I would like to add is that, yes, I agree. We should be reaching out to these organizations as a community of abolitionists and hold them accountable. And we need to hold them accountable just like we hold non-vegans accountable for their actions. We need to hold these organizations accountable and explain to them, again, not from a perspective of infighting, but from a perspective of, hey, to reach this vegan world that we know is possible, the message has to be, on point.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah,
somebody in the chat mentioned something about funding, and maybe that's why they do it, and maybe that's true. I don't know, but
it could be. It is kind of frustrating because, like I said, like even if like it's not explicitly said that, like in these undercover exposés, like I said so many times, it's not even necessarily that they have an explicit welfare as a message. It's that it's what's not said. It's the fact that it's put out in this sensational manner, which makes it seem like this one-off nightmarish thing that happened in this one place. And it's like, we got to be clear that like, this is standard practice. This isn't like oh my God, look what happened. It's like, this is happening everywhere all the time. And this is like the regulation. I think that's like so much more important than making it a sensational thing. I mean, it is sensational, but it's also commonplace, unfortunately. And it's so important to frame it that way, because otherwise it does just give these people this out of like, well, that's horrible, but my eggs don't come from a place like that. So it is that kind of same thing of like being careful, not only of like pushing a welfare message, but also kind of letting one just be there by not being clear is also damaging. So yeah.
Thank you, Juan. Is that good? Okay, thank you for that question, Juan. Great question. Next hand I see is Susan. Susan, go ahead and unmute and ask the question.
Yes, hello. This has been a wonderful talk. I wrote in the comments, Emily, just so well spoken and articulate and thought-provoking, and I appreciate it so much. I was a few minutes late, but I think I've gotten the gist of it. And I really like your notion of just stating the facts to people so that you don't give people the opportunity to be mad at you for being the messenger. You just, talk about the fact. We need to all have the facts at our fingertips so we can talk about the facts and not exaggerate or whatever. The facts speak for themselves. And then it's a good way perhaps to sidestep people's defensiveness. Like, oh, how come you vegans always want us to do whatever you're doing, and stuff like that. And I just wanted to share an actual illustration of how wrong I was in handling something just yesterday. And it really proves Emily's point. So sometimes I go on conservative news sites because I kind of want to see what's happening in the world. And as disturbing as it is, it's kind of like watching, videos of farmed animals being tortured. But I'd like to see what, people are posting. And so there was an article, I think this was just yesterday, there was an article about maybe a bunch of cow meat going bad and being recalled. And I wrote a comment, and I knew I was being provocative, but it just proves your point. I wrote a comment and I said, this is all I said. I said, consider not eating, what did I say? Consider not eating the carcass of a dead animal. And boy, people were so angry. I had one guy like insulting me and calling me a Karen, and other people not liking what I said. And so I kind of did the opposite of what you're suggesting. I could have said, had I had this workshop 2 days ago instead of today, I might have said, well, of course that meat was tainted because this, that, and the other thing. So I'm not insulting them. I'm taking it off of me. I'm taking it off of them. I'm just talking about the standard practice. So that was like a real life example.
Yeah. Well, and you can also it's not even just like the don't blame me, but I find that it can be really disarming for people when you do frame it in the like, hey, you have a right to know this. Like, this is about your rights, you know, because then it, it also, it goes from being, let me tell you about whatever. It's to like, hey, I think that you have a right to know this, like, because this affects you. This affects your health. This affects your, and like I said, you also have a right to know what people are doing to animals, because as passionate as I am about animals, I'm also extremely passionate about everybody's right to know the truth and everybody's right to have all of the knowledge to make the decisions. And so if you frame it in that way, it is more disarming, because it's not like, let me tell you, it's like, you deserve this information.
It's almost like gifting them that information.
Yeah.
I mean, not in an arrogant way, but just like, you probably don't know, and I want to share this with you because you have a right to know.
Yeah.
And your health and your family's health depends on knowing this, or whatever, just like being kind of sympathetic to the people who.
Because I don't think I've ever met a single vegan who didn't feel that they wish they'd known sooner. So, it's just, here's your opportunity to know sooner. So,
yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to share that experience because I didn't handle it well. I didn't think much about it. It was a knee-jerk reaction too. And I knew that it was provocative, but I'm finding your thoughts on this to be very helpful, Emily.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for asking that and knowing that you're in a safe space where you won't be judged, and it's all about just learning. It's all about learning, and we're all still learning. So thanks for such a great question. I see Arwen has your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much, Emily. That was so great. So I wanted to know, like, specifically, like, what do you think about using like more shocking words that like Holocaust, rape, and murder? Because like sometimes I feel like, well, when I do it, it sort of distracts the person and they focus on that, and we never get a chance to talk about animals again. But when I see it done, like in disruptions, like specifically Tash, like Peterson, and it just gives me chills because it, it is the truth. But, how do you feel about that?
I think it's a kind of a time and a place and an audience thing, that's something that, like, when in the beginning of the speech, when I was talking about like being uncertain, it's like, it's important to not feel like we have to have a template and we apply it no matter what. Because there's times where like that terminology is incredibly effective and incredibly appropriate. And there's other times where it's like, maybe you're talking to someone you don't really know that much, and then they ask you like, why are you a vegan? And you're like, because you're raping cows. Like, not the time.
Yeah.
And it's not always that obvious to know when it's appropriate. And trust me, I've had my share of like misreading tone like a beast most of my life. It's kind of my jam. But yeah, there are times where it is really important to use that kind of verbiage, and because honestly it's true, like it's what's happening. But it's kind of feeling out the, like, who is my audience, what am I trying to accomplish, and like what's kind of the tone of this situation. And that doesn't mean, though, like, once again, it's not, we always think that, like, as humans, we always feel it has to be a dichotomy, this either or, black and white, and that's rarely the case. So just because if you're not going to use a term like rape or murder or Holocaust, doesn't mean that then you have to go to the other side of being like, well, it's all right, like you can still be completely strong in the convictions and in the clarity without necessarily using polarizing language, but you don't have to go to the point of using like language that makes it sound like, well, everything's fine, they're just, whatever, so, and like, there are also times like in this speech, I said sexually violated for the cow instead of rape, which is still very accurate, and so I think it is like, it's kind of that time and place, and you can talk about ending the life of a sentient being who, like, which is essentially murder, so again, it's like I can't really give like a sorry guys, loud noise. I can't really give like a do this then and do that whatever, but I think that there is a time and a place, and that there are very appropriate times to do that. And
that's a great answer. Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you for your question, Arwen. So Shannon, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi. Again, thank you, Emily, so much for this. Was amazing. And based on what Arwen just asked, I had been vegetarian for 19 years, and it was somebody telling me that I was supporting rape and kidnapping, and called me a hypocrite, that provoked me to do the research and find out the truth. So I definitely, it can be very helpful. And some of my favorite things to say are like sea life instead of seafood. And I also will say pre-vegans instead of non-vegans. And I ask people if they're vegan yet. But my question was, what do you think at this point would be like some of the most effective forms of activism, and some of the best times to be able to, like, when I'm fortunate, I get to teach once a week at Evan's school, and I try to walk a fine line because they are kids, but I still try to tell them the truth. And but yeah, what's some of the most effective forms that you believe of activism currently for the state that we're in?
That's really hard. I don't know if I can say like a certain answer. I mean, I always, default to, is in a broad strokes, like education. I do believe that education is, but that can take so many different forms, and I know that there's so many different ways of doing it, and while, I've kind of chosen for the brunt of mine to be online and digitally based, which of course, like, then you can reach more people. I think it's also too important not to discount the daily interactions that we can have, and taking advantage of those. I know that it's not like I'm reaching millions of people with this, but I think it can be easy to kind of miss those opportunities in just day-to-day conversation, where we can end up making a change. There's an anecdote I've told before, where I was coming back from the airport after a trip to the UK where I'd been speaking, And there I'd been at a slaughterhouse where you could hear the churning of the gas chambers and the screaming of the pigs. And I was in an Uber and we passed a truck with pigs. And I was like, oh, it's so sad knowing that they're going to the gas chambers. And he's like, the what? And I was like, well, yeah, pigs are killed in gas chambers. And I was explaining it to him and he was really confused because he's like, well, I used to work on a pig farm. I didn't know that they're killing gas chambers. And I was like, yeah, it's, you know, it's seen as a humane thing, but it's really not. They burn from the inside out. And I was like, I was just over in the UK listening and blah, blah, blah. I was just having this conversation with this guy who was obviously not a vegan. And it was, I don't even know how much later, like a year or more or something, I don't know. I was on a hangout on like my Patreon where my patrons we do a monthly hangout. And this guy on the video hangout was like, hey, I was your Uber driver that one time. And it's like, he's like, you know, found me online, I guess, and like decided to support the work. And it was just like, who knows? You know, you don't know. Just having a random conversation with an Uber driver, you know, and it's like, and it can get people's wheels turning. So I know that's not really like here's how to change the world, talk to Uber drivers. It's not it. But it's like, you know, I do think education, getting, you know, just in any form that we can, reaching people, you know, I'm always hesitant to say, here's the most effective thing, because it differs for every person. Every person has a different way of reaching people, and other people can reach people in a way that I never can, you know? And so I am always hesitant to prescribe like do this thing, because maybe that's not your thing. Like maybe someone is a really great artist and they create drawings, and then like through that they can, you know, everybody has a thing. I think it's like finding your passion and in what way you feel like you can get it across, and that's going to be the most effective form. Because I think like when we, at least personally for me, the more I try to like kind of figure out like what I should be doing or what is like the thing to do, like the less effective I can become at times. So I don't know if that was helpful at all.
No, very helpful. And also, I really loved what you said at the beginning when you explained that, you know, not being too comfortable or like too confident is really important, because we can always be evolving and learning more and getting better. I feel like I learn more every single week, if not every single day. And thank you so much again, Emily. We really appreciate this.
Thank you for being here.
What a great group we are indeed. And Kelly, you're up next with a question. You can unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay. I just wanted to know, how do you frame the compassion toward animals and the vegan message with respect to the Bible when you're dealing with that as an example of justifying it? Yeah. I like to think of it as in the Old Testament, the animal sacrifices were done, and in the New Testament, it seems like they got away from that. It wasn't necessary because Jesus gave his life for us, so those sacrifices weren't necessary. I just wanted to get your, you know, your thoughts and your how you handle that with respect to the Bible.
Yeah. So, and I actually, oh my gosh, I'm sorry guys, I keep hitting my thing. I do plan to get into this more in like a more dedicated thing. I'm going to paste this in here real quick. I have a oh, hold on. Ooh, send it to everybody. I have a history of veganism series, and I think Middle Ages gets more into the rise of Christianity, but Ancient Times gets also, I think, talks some about things from the Hebrew scriptures. So that is just, you can just look at that at some point. But that kind of talks a little bit about like the evolution of vegetarian veganism within Christianity and the Bible and things like that. Although a lot of that is more like the aesthetic things. But you know, like one of the things that sorry, I was trying to see if I could no, wait, hold on. So sorry. like there are things like within the Bible that you can find that are supportive of vegan principles. Of course, as with many other things, there are things in the Bible that you can find that are not. But there are like, there's one I was trying to find that in Genesis, it reads like, I give you all the plants that bear seed everywhere on the earth, and every tree bearing fruit which yields seed. They shall be yours for food. All green plants I give for food to the wild animals, to the birds of heaven, and to the reptiles on earth. Every living creature, it shall be theirs for food. So just talking about like in the utopian times in the Garden of Eden, humans and animals were kind of created vegan because it's like, here's these plants. So one thing that you can talk about is like, okay, well, because yeah, like eventually that all goes to crap, and then, you know, everything goes wrong. But it's like, okay, if the idea, like one thing that I've you know, talked with Christians about in the past is like, okay, if you're striving for the, like, generally the belief is that you're striving for the ideal, you're striving kind of for that, to get back to that ideal. And if the ideal originally was that the lion lays with the lamb, and like everyone eats plants and there's no killing, and that's the way it was before the fall, and we're supposed to be striving to kind of get to that in all other aspects of our lives, why not strive to get to that in the way that we treat animals?
Excellent.
You know?
Thank you.
So that's something. There's also a book called Dominion by Mike Scully, and I think he gets into that. He's it's been forever since I read it, but he actually has a more conservative like background and everything, and so he, I think, does a good job of kind of coming at it from that perspective. But one thing I will say that I never do with speaking to people from any religion, because I also have a video on halal and kosher slaughter where I get into that, and things like that, is like, I do see sometimes people might be like, well, your argument from your religion is invalid because your religion is invalid. And it's like, I never find that to be a very fruitful approach. It's like, you know, I think it's helpful to kind of be like, let's look at, because if you look in like the tenets of Judaism, the tenets of Islam, like there are so many passages and things within these religions that are supportive of vegan ideals. And so I think it's much more fruitful conversation to speak with people on that level than just be like, your religion is invalid, goodbye. You know, like I don't find that to be very, very helpful at all, you know, because it's so core and central to people's beings, you know, and I want to be respectful of that. So anyways, hope that's helpful.
I think it was helpful, right, Kelly? Thank you very much for asking that question. I thought I saw another hand up, but I don't see another hand now. But so does anybody have a question? Oh, Amanda, hold on one second. Before I forget, AAM just also did a workshop last year on animal rights and spirituality and religion, and that is archived on our YouTube channel. If anybody also wants to check that out, if any of the mentors can put that link to that specific workshop in the chat, that would be great. Amanda, go ahead and unmute to ask your question.
Hi, Emily, big fan. Thank you so much for all that you do. My question is kind of, it's not about direct talking to people. Someone asked me a question and I've never been in this situation before. So I don't know how I would progress. So in speaking with people, if you're sitting with, like I work at a job where sometimes we go overseas, and I know you have some experience being in foreign countries, and say you're given something, you know, as a sign of you don't want to be disrespectful in a say of like saying, no, I can't eat that. Because like in my job, we also get informed on protocols. Like if we travel outside of the States, we have to actually get briefed on the country that we're going to. But obviously, like I don't ever remember hearing anything of like veganism and the things that we would say in those situations. And I was actually at a vegan meetup and someone asked me the question, well, what do you do if you're at a dinner with people and, you know, it's a sign of disrespect if you don't consume what's in front of you based off of the country or you know, whatever type of environment that you would be in. How would you, do you have any experience or anything to share within that realm with us? I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wish I had like I feel like I don't have a great answer for this one. I have, you know, traveled, and like when I lived in India, like if you don't eat like what's put in front of you, it's like it is seen as insulting. And even if you cover your plate, they'll slip it in. I actually had to put it in my mouth once. It was great. But it was a little bit easier there because I mean there's dairy all over the place, but by and large it's primarily, you know, vegetarian. But sometimes something I have used before in a cross-cultural context was, and I think it's not ideal because it's not necessarily, it feels a bit dishonest at times, but if I find that it's going to be really difficult to kind of relay the vegan aspect of things, one thing that I have used instead is talking about an allergy, that I have an allergy to X, Y, or Z. Because in a way, my body probably would not tolerate animal products very well at this point in my life, you know, like it's not going to like it. And sometimes like that can make more sense to people that like, oh, I have an allergy to this. Of course, that's not going to open dialogue to talk about veganism, but sometimes that's just not the time or the place. And it's more about, you know, just trying to explain why you're not going to eat this and not be insulting to the person, because it's like if they can understand that you physically cannot do it, then that at least removes the insult. It's not really an ideal solution, but that's one that I've had to use, like, you know, a couple times, just because it seemed to work the most, like cross-culturally communication wise. I don't know, I feel like other people might have better things for that. If you are able to talk to them ahead of time, of course, that's great, but sometimes in these situations you can't. So.
And I have, like, here in the States, like if I'm going to a friend's house, it doesn't ever bother me. Oh, sorry, I don't have my camera on. It doesn't ever bother me to make something and bring something and share with everyone else. I do that at work all the time. But in this situation, it would be like if I was at a work function and something was served where I couldn't go ahead of time, even if I ate beforehand, like if something's sitting in front of me, and I'm assuming that's what the person that was asking me the question kind of was insinuating, is like, you're at a dinner for, you know, work related overseas, and something's placed in front of you and you don't eat any of it. As at work, they all know me. Like I've got pamphlets up, I've got information up. They know, they know all about me. But yeah, I didn't really have a direct answer on that, besides like doing research ahead of time, talking to people ahead of time. But in the moment situation, if you can't do that prep stuff ahead of time, I just didn't know if you had ever been in that situation or anything. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll bring snacks with me too. Like I was thinking more of like if you're in a situation in like where I was living and studying in India, where it's like my host family, or you're in kind of a culture, it's not even like a work thing, but it's like where culturally it's like incredibly insulting if you don't eat whatever, you know, and like and that's at that point is where I might sometimes whip out the allergy, when it's like nothing else is really going to get there. But yeah, it can be challenging. And in India, our host families wanted to weigh us when we got there, and then weigh us when they sent us home, to make sure that we gained weight so our families would know they took good care of us. Like it's very big to make sure that everyone's well fed. It was quite an experience. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Amanda. We are covering a lot of territory in our workshop, and actually we're getting sort of close to needing to wrap up. So I guess we're going to go ahead and wrap up then, if there aren't any other very, very quick last questions, which I don't see. Okay, so hold on, everybody. Don't go anywhere yet. I have some announcements, but thank you, everybody, for all your wonderful questions already. I'm going to thank Emily so much for being here and all that you have provided for us today in our workshop, and we need to have you back. So a couple of announcements of upcoming workshops. On May 3rd, our next workshop is on handling police and tips for being a police liaison. On May 19th, we have a workshop on writing as activism. On May 24th, a workshop on the plant-based treaty with Anita, the director of the SAVE movement. On June 6th, we have our security culture, staying safe online and offline as an activist workshop. And then we have 3 large live event announcements. One, AAM Chicago Convergence 2022 is a 10-day animal rights activism event that will be largely focused on taking action against the fur industry, but will also include actions for animals suffering in agriculture industries. And the dates are July 29th through the 7th. Yes, the facilitator of our writing workshop is here with us tonight, MC Maya Cohen-Rowan. She's putting some info in the chat there. Maya, maybe you want to put the link to where they can buy your books in the chat if you want to. The second big live event coming up is the Tampa Turnout, which is next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, May 6th through 8th in Tampa, Florida. 3 days of action for the animals. There will be outreach, demos, protests, and a march. And it's not too late to register for that. And the third one is the AAM Ohio Occurrence. Is a 3-day animal rights activism event in Cleveland, Ohio. Amanda Murphy will be happy I mentioned that. And this event will feature several different types of animal rights activism, and all activists are welcome, as they're welcome in all of our events, no matter how much experience you have or don't have. And the dates for the Ohio Occurrence are September 2nd through 4th. So check out our page for more details, and please register in advance, or if anyone wants to put the link for our page or for the event pages themselves in the chat, certainly that would be greatly appreciated. So everybody join me in really thanking Emily for what she presented tonight, for all of your time and wisdom. Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Thank you, Emily.
And everybody knows bitesizevegan.org is her website. And that's also you have a YouTube channel as well. Is that correct? And it goes by the same.
Right. Yeah. And you can find like bitesizevegan.org. It's the hub for all of it. You can find all the stuff there. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm
thank you.
Really honored to be part of this.
So if anybody's interested in becoming a mentor or a mentee, or want to get more involved with AAM, reach out to any AAM mentor or go to our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. And meanwhile, we'll also be adding you all to our email newsletter list so that you'll receive information in your inbox about what AAM is up to. So thank you, everybody, so much. Stay strong and live vegan. Thank you, everybody. Go ahead and if you'd like to put your Instagram handles in the chat, go ahead and do that if you'd like to share those, and any other takeaways from tonight, any websites, greatly appreciated. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.